Welcome to Crossover Commander, where we show you how to cross over your favorite pop culture characters through the blind eternities so they can command your deck with style. If you really enjoy what you see here today and would like to see this channel grow, check us out on TikTok and Patreon. The links will be in the description section down below. It looks like this portal is stabilizing, so let's get on with this show. Joker is by far the most popular character that I've ever built a deck of. He was first brought to the page in 1940 in Batman issue number 1. He's been Batman's arch nemesis for almost as long as the character's been around. He is known for his maniacal laughter, his crazy schemes, and the fact that he's nuttier than a squirrel, and you never know whether he's gonna kill you or give you $100. Probably gonna kill you, but you never know. As the Batman is the embodiment of law and order, Joker is the embodiment of chaos. He strives in everything chaotic, to the point where nobody really knows where he even comes from. As he said in one famous comic, sometimes I remember it one way, sometimes I remember it another. If I have to have a history, I'd prefer it to be multiple choice. I'd like to present to you Joker the Magic card. Now, Joker and Jury, Master of the Review, have a lot of similarities. They're both Rakdos, because they're crazy and self-interested and totally committed to their own interests. Now, they also match on a character level. Both of them run a crazy carnival where murder is on the stage and freak shows are involved and all sorts of chaotic mayhem. They're both crazy. You never know if they're going to kill you or put you in a show or any other number of things. Their mechanics work well together. Joker's clearly homicidal, so whenever he's sacrificing his teammates, he's getting stronger. And then if he is going to kick the bucket or lose, he'll gladly take everything out with him when he goes. And that's evident on the card of whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a 1/1 counter on Jury, Master of the Review, and when Jury dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Joker is all about reveling in the chaos. So this is going to be a chaos deck. We've got stuff that may not make sense on first look, but when you go back to the main theme of the deck, you go, alright, that fits. To that end, we've got Theater of Horrors, giving us kind of a weird drawback, upside situation. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Downside, and then during your turn, if an opponent lost life this turn, you may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way. And then you can use it to deal damage. So, upside, downside, it works for you. And then we've got Havoc Festival. It says players can't gain life, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses half his or her life rounded up. Because Joker's willing to play a crazy game. So let's talk about the strategy in Rule 0 for Joker. This deck is meant to cause chaos. It is meant to disrupt the board state, and it will have you switching cards across the table. So make sure your play group is okay with that. Past that, its power level is indeterminate. It can either dirtle or go absolutely insane. And the way you claim victory with this deck, the Joker wins by taking advantage of the unstable board that he creates and can kill out of nowhere with commander damage on more than one opponent at the same time. Now that we've gone over the strategy and the win conditions for the Joker, this is a perfect time to remind you this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme will be added regardless of price. Cards that are not essential to fit the theme will be made as budget-friendly as possible. So now that we've gone over the Joker and introduced his card, we should get into the mana base before this deck gets too crazy. We start with Cinder Barons, comes into play tapped, and it taps for a black or a red. Then we got Blightstep Pathway. It can either tap for a black or a red, depending on how you put it in. And then we've got the Rainbow Veil, which already starts the craziness. It says, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Control of Rainbow Veil passes to opponent at the end of the turn. And then we've got Bog Wreckage. It comes into play tapped, but you can get it to add a black mana, or you can sack it to add 1 mana of any color. Then we've got the Dwarven Runes. Comes into play tapped. Again, you can add a red mana off of it, or sacrifice it for 2 red mana. And then we've got Command Tower, which taps for any color we need. And then we have Myriad Landscape, which enters the battlefield tapped, but you can sacrifice it for 2 mana to search your library for 2 basic lands that share a type. And then we've got Rakdos Carnarium. It enters the battlefield tapped, but when it enters, you return a land you control to your hand, and it taps for both red and black. And then we've got Mortuary Mire. It enters the battlefield tapped. When Mortuary Mire enters the battlefield, you may put a target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. Next, we've got Cindermarsh. It adds a colorless, or if you choose not to untap it next turn, it can tap for a red or a black. Then we've got Blighted Gorge. Also taps for a colorless, but for 4 and a red, you can sacrifice it to deal 2 damage to a creature or a player. Then we've got Dwarven Mine. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 other mountains. And when it enters the battlefield untapped, create a 1/1 red dwarf creature token. And then we've got Emergent Zone. It can tap for a colorless, or you can sacrifice it and cast a spell as though it had flash this turn. Then we've got the Fabled Passage. Just sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land, then you put it onto the battlefield. And then we've got Gargoyle Castle. Taps for a colorless, or 5, sacrifice it, create a 3/4 colorless Gargoyle artifact creature token with flying. Then we've got Evolving Wilds. Sacrifice Evolving Wilds, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library. Then we've got Haunted Fengraf. You can tap it for a colorless, or 3 and tap it to sacrifice it to grab a creature at random from your graveyard. And then we've got Immistrum's Skullcairn. Comes into play tapped, taps for a black. And you can pay 1 black and 2 red to sacrifice it to deal 3 damage to target player. That player discards a card. Then we've got Opal Palace. Taps for a colorless, or you could pay 1 to add a mana of any color to your commander's color identity. If you spend it to cast your commander, it gives him an additional +1/+1 counter. Then we've got Terramorphic Expanse. Sacrifice it to search for a land. Then we've got Sulphurous Mire. It's a snow land. It comes in tapped, but it taps for red or black. Then we've got the Tyrant Sanctum. It's tap for a colorless, and then 2. Target legendary creature becomes a god and gets a +1/+1 counter. And then for 4, tap and sacrifice it, put an indestructible counter on the god. And then for Warped Landscape, it searches for a basic land. Then we've got Blighted Fen. For 4 and a black, you can target opponent, sacrifices a creature. Then we've got Spawning Pool. You can sacrifice it for 6 mana and get 3 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens that each tap for a mana. Then we've got Ravaged Highlands. Taps for a red, but you can also sacrifice it to tap for any color. Then we've got Cave of Temptations. Adds mana of any color, or you can sacrifice it to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. Now, all of these lands, or most of them at least, sacrifice, and that'll help Joker out a lot. And to finish up, we've got 6 mountains and 2 swamps. So to get Joker's Carnival rolling, we've got Rakdos Cluestone, taps for a red or a black, and then you could sacrifice it to draw a card. We got Rakdos Signet for 1, you could tap it to get a red and a black. We got Rakdos Keyrune, taps for a red or a black, or you can turn it into a devil. Then we got Rakdos Locket. You can sacrifice it for 4 Rakdos to draw 2 cards, or it taps for mana. Then we've got Commander Sphere. Same thing, taps for mana, draws you a card. Then we've got Traveler's Amulet. You sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land. Then we got Unstable Obelisk. For 7, you could tap and sacrifice it to destroy a target permanent. For Armillary Sphere, you can pay 2, sack it to go grab 2 lands out of your library. Same thing for Field Scarecrow and Burnished Heart. Like all clowns, Joker likes to give a smile. So with that, we have Wishclaw Talisman. For 1 and a black, it enters the battlefield with 3 wish counters on it, and for 1, you can tap and remove a wish counter from it to search your library for a card, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library, and then a target opponent will gain control of it. You can activate this ability only during your turn. Now we got Scheming Symmetry. For 1 black, you can choose 2 target players, which can be yourself. Each of them search their libraries for a card, then shuffle their library and puts the card on top. Then we have Humble Defector for 1 and a red. You tap it to draw 2 cards, then target opponent gains control of Humble Defector. And then we've got Stark of Wrath for 1 and 2 red. It can tap to destroy artifact or creature. That permanent's controller gains control of Stark of Wrath. And then we've got Explosion of Riches. Draw a card for 5 and a red. You draw a card, then each other player may draw a card. Whenever a card is drawn this way, Explosion of Riches deals 5 damage to target opponent chosen at random from among your opponents. Then we've got Captive Audience for 5, a black, and a red. Captive Audience enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Your life total becomes 4. Discard your hand, or each opponent creates 5 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Then we've got Wheel of Misfortune. Each player secretly chooses a number from 0 or greater. Then all players reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest number revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number of to each player who chose the number. Each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand, then draws 7 cards, and that's for 2 and a red. And then we've got Court of Ambition for 2 and 2 black. It enters the battlefield and makes you the monarch. And at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card. If you're the monarch, instead each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. Nobody ever said Joker was good at gift giving. Now, Joker's got the fun times to make the bad days go away. Well, at least for himself. We've got Caravec the Merciless. He's 5 and black and red. It says whenever an opponent casts a spell, Caravec the Merciless deals damage to target creature or player equal to that spell's converted mana cost. Then we've got Undercity Informer for 2 and a black, and then 1 sacrifice a creature. Target player reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a land card, then puts those cards into his or her graveyard. Then we've got Mere Retriever for 2 generic. When Mere Retriever dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Then we've got Harvester of Souls for 4 and 2 black. He's got Death Touch, and whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. Then we have Pawn of Ulamog. Whenever Pawn of Ulamog or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add a colorless mana to your mana pool. Then we've got Dimir Houseguard for 3 and a black. It has Fear and sacrifice a creature, regenerate Dimir Houseguard. It also has the transmute ability, so you can use this to search your library for any of the other 4 mana spells in the deck. Then we've got Workshop Assistant. When Workshop Assistant dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. This guy and Mere Retriever, they're the best of friends. They work out great together. Now Joker's really having some fun. We have Tyrant of Discord for 4 and 3 red. When Tyrant of Discord enters the battlefield, target opponent chooses a permanent he or she controls at random and sacrifices it. If a non-land permanent is sacrificed this way, repeat the process. And then Necrotic Plague is for 2 and 2 black. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature. When enchanted creature is put into a graveyard, its controller chooses target creature one of his or her opponent's controls, return Necrotic Plague from its owner's graveyard to the battlefield attached to that creature. And then Impulsive Maneuvers. Whenever a creature attacks, flip a coin. If you win the flip, the next time that creature would deal combat damage this turn, it deals double that damage instead. If you lose the flip, the next time that creature would deal combat damage this turn, prevent that damage. And then Haphazard Bombardment for 5 and a red. When Haphazard Bombardment enters the battlefield, choose 4 non-enchantment permanents you don't control and put an aim counter on each of them. At the beginning of your end step, if 2 or more permanents you don't control have an aim counter on them, destroy one of those permanents at random. Then Cruel Entertainment for 6 and a black. Choose target player and another target player. The first player controls the second player during the second player's next turn, and the second player controls the first player during the first player's next turn. And then Capricious Ifrit for 4 and 2 red. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose target non-land permanent you control, and up to 2 target non-land permanents you don't control. Destroy one of them at random. And then Chaos Warp for 2 and a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. Then we've got Vampiric Rites for 1 black mana. It's an enchantment. It says for 1 and a black, sacrifice a creature, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Then we have Sin Prodder for 2 and a red. It's a menace creature. It has at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. Any opponent may have you put that card into your graveyard. If a player does, Sin Prodder deals damage to that player equal to that card's converted mana cost. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. Then we have Mayhem Devil for 1 black and a red. It says whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. And then we have Harley Quinn, the Joker's main squeeze. She's being represented by Judith the Scourge Diva. Other creatures you control get +1/+0, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. Then we've got Vergoth the Bloodsky Sire. He's 2 and a black and has Death Touch and the Boast ability for 1 and a black. When he attacks, target player searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top. Then we've got Beseech the Queen for either 6 mana or 3 black mana. It's a sorcery that says search your library for a card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control, reveal it and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Then we've got the Eye of Yawgmoth for 3 generic mana. It's an artifact that says for 3 tap, sacrifice a creature, reveal cards from the top of your library equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Put 1 into your hand and remove the rest from the game. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats and dogs, now the carnival begins. We have Scrambleverse for 6 and 2 red. For each non-land permanent, choose a player at random, then each player gains control of each permanent for which he or she was chosen. Untap those permanents. Grip of Chaos for 4 and 2 red is an enchantment. It says whenever a spell or ability is put onto the stack, reselect its target at random if it has a single target. For Mana Flare, it's 2 and a red. It's an enchantment. It says whenever any player taps a land for mana, it produces 1 additional mana of that same type. Then we have Warp World for 5 and 3 red. It's a sorcery. It says each player shuffles all permanents he or she owns into his or her library. Then reveals that many cards from the top of his or her library. Each player puts all artifact, creature, and land cards revealed this way onto the battlefield, then does the same for enchantment cards, then puts all cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield on the bottom of his or her library. Then we have Sunbird's Invocation for 5 and a red. It says whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library. where X is that spell's mana value. You may cast a spell with mana value X or less from among cards revealed this way without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library. Then we have Stolen Strategy for 4 and a red. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of each opponent's library until end of turn. You may cast non-land cards from among those exiled cards, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to do so. Then we have Chaos Wand for 3 generic. It's an artifact. It says, 4, tap, target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, then put the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of that library in random order. Then we have Pandemonium for 3 and a red. It says whenever a creature comes into play, that creature's controller may have it deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player of his or her choice. Then we have Confusion in the Ranks. It's for 3 and 2 red. It's an enchantment. It says whenever an artifact, creature, or enchantment comes into play, its controller chooses target permanent another player controls that shares a type with it. Exchange control of those permanents. The Joker's now in full swing, dancing his maniacal dance. With Masque Nexus, it's an artifact for 4 generic mana. Creatures you control are every creature type. And then Zathrid Necromancer for 2 and a black. Whenever Zathrid Necromancer or another human creature you control dies, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token, which would also be a human. And then Skirk Prospector for 1 red. You could sacrifice a goblin, which those human zombie creature tokens would be as well, to add 1 red mana. And then Barrage of Expendables for 1 red mana. You can pay a red mana to sacrifice a creature to deal 1 damage to any target. Makeshift Munitions is the same thing, just with generic mana. Then Viscera Seer for 1 black mana allows you to sack a creature for scry 1. And then Black Market for 3 and 2 black. Whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add a black for each charge counter on Black Market. And then Nadir's Nightblade. Whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. And then Undead Augur for 2 black. Whenever Undead Augur or another zombie you control dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So with the Masque Nexus, all your creatures are every creature type, and all of these cards are turned on, and you can get up to some infinite shenanigans. It gets pretty crazy with this. Now these cards are some of the Joker's favorites. We've got Malakir Rebirth for 1 black. It says choose target creature. You lose 2 life until end of turn. That creature gains when this creature dies. Return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. And then we have Knowledge Pool. When Knowledge Pool enters the battlefield, each player exiles the top 3 cards of his or her library. And whenever a player casts a spell from his or her hand, that player exiles it. If the player does, he or she may cast another non-land card exiled with Knowledge Pool without paying that card's mana cost. And then we have Possibility Storm. Whenever a player casts a spell from his or her hand, that player exiles it, then exiles cards from the top of his or her library until he or she exiles a card that shares a card type with it. That player may cast this card without paying its mana cost. Then he or she puts all cards exiled with Possibility Storm on the bottom of his or her library in a random order. Then we have Mortal Combat. At the beginning of your upkeep, if 20 or more creature cards are in your graveyard, you win the game. And Mortality Shift. It says exchange your graveyard in your library, then shuffle your library. These cards will be the final nail in the coffin when Joker's done doing his dance. These cards are the Joker's favorites because they allow him to win the game on the spot. With Malakir Rebirth, you can sacrifice him after you've hit somebody to kill somebody else and then immediately bring him back. because his sacrifice ability gives him commander damage on that attack as well. And then Knowledge Pool and Possibility Storm will lock them out of playing their decks properly. And then Mortal Kombat and Mortality Shift instantly win you the game. And now that we've gotten to play in Joker's Carnival, we need to look at the average price of the deck. At the time of release, it's anywhere between $115 and $155 depending on where you purchase from. Obviously, it can be cheaper if you don't mind playing with damaged cards. And then to look at the stats, we've got 12 forms of ramp. A lot of that is the sacrifice ramp, like Burnished Heart or stuff like that. And it works perfectly in this deck. And then we've got 4 tutors, like the Dimir House Guard, the Beseech the Queen, that type of stuff. We've got 8 card draw spells, 15 forms of interaction. No real board wipes to speak of, but you kind of want the board to be crazy in this deck. And then we've got 36 lands, that's including Malakir Rebirth. Remember, this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme were added regardless of price. Cards that were not essential to fit the theme were made as budget-friendly as possible. If you want to optimize this list, feel free to leave your upgrades in the comments section below. Most importantly, this deck is meant to be a new and engaging way to spice up your Commander games, so fun is the top priority. Thank you for watching this crossover deck tech. If you liked this video, check out our other content on YouTube or TikTok. Your viewership means the multiverse to the crossover commander, and if you would like to become a part of this growing Terran reality, you can like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to vote on the next pop culture character to crossover, check out our Patreon where we have some awesome perks. If you have any ideas or complaints, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Now that this portal's closing, see you next time.